Please don't let him kill me. Those were the words my daughter whispered into the phone the night everything finally broke apart. I can still hear the sound behind her voice. Glass shattering, a man screaming, and fear, real fear, the kind no father ever forgets. By the time I reached her house 10 minutes later, my son-in-law Derek was lying face down on his own kitchen floor with my knee pressed against his shoulder blade, while two county deputies rushed through the front door. He kept yelling, "This old man attacked me?" But the deputies weren't looking at him. They were looking at me. One of them noticed the way I controlled Derek's wrist without hurting him. The positioning, the calm breathing, the awareness. Military men recognize certain things in each other, even after decades. One deputy looked at me carefully and asked, "Sir, were you service?" I stared straight ahead. "Retired Navy." That was all I said. I didn't mention the SEAL teams. Didn't mention Afghanistan. Didn't mention the men I buried. At my age, you learn silence is easier, especially when you've spent most of your life trying to forget. 3 months earlier, nobody in our family would have believed things could end this way, especially not Derek. Derek Coleman was 39 years old. Tall, expensive haircut, white teeth, loud opinions about everything. He sold luxury trucks outside Wilmington and carried himself like a man who believed the world owed him applause for entering a room. When he first married my daughter Emily, I tried hard to like him. Truth is, I wanted to like him. After my wife Carol died from breast cancer 12 years ago, Emily was all I had left. So when she brought Derek home, smiling like a teenager again, I ignored a lot of things that bothered me. The bragging, the drinking, the way he interrupted her constantly, the way she laughed nervously whenever he teased her. I told myself all young couples had rough edges. Maybe that was my first mistake. I'm Walter Hayes, 68 years old, retired, widower, living in a small coastal town in North Carolina where everybody fishes, everybody attends church on Sunday, and everybody pretends family problems stop at the front porch. Most folks around town know me as the quiet old man with the pickup truck and the Labrador retriever named Duke. They see me buying tomatoes at the farmer's market. They see me fixing lawnmowers for neighbors. They see me sitting alone at the diner every Thursday morning drinking black coffee. That's all they see. And honestly, I preferred it that way. I spent 26 years inside Naval Special Warfare. By the time I retired, I'd had enough noise, enough funerals, enough adrenaline to last several lifetimes. Peace became precious. Or at least I thought I had peace. The first time I noticed something truly wrong with Emily's marriage was at Thanksgiving 2 years earlier. Emily had always loved cooking with her mother when she was young. Sweet potato casserole, homemade rolls, pecan pie. Carol taught her everything. That Thanksgiving, Emily accidentally overcooked the turkey a little. Nothing dramatic. Little dry, that's all. Derek carved one slice, smirked, and said loudly, "Well, good thing you're pretty Em, because you sure aren't winning Top Chef." Everybody chuckled awkwardly. Emily laughed too. But I noticed something. Her shoulders tightened immediately, like she'd been hit before the joke even landed. Years in the teams teach you to watch tiny reactions. Tiny reactions tell the truth. I started paying closer attention after that. At Christmas, Derek mocked the sweater Emily wore. At Easter, he snapped at her because she forgot ice for the cooler. At family dinners, he corrected her stories constantly. That's not how it happened. You always exaggerate. Emily's terrible with details. Small humiliations. Constant little cuts. And every time Emily smiled through it, that worried me more than if she'd fought back. One July evening, I invited them over for barbecue. Nothing fancy. Burgers, corn on the cob, store-brand potato salad. A couple neighbors came by too. Derek had already been drinking before he arrived. I could smell whiskey underneath his cologne. He watched me flipping burgers beside the grill and laughed. "You know, Walt, you're the calmest old man I've ever met." I smiled politely. "That's supposed to be an insult." "Nah," he said. "Just saying. Most retired military guys never shut up about it. You barely mention it." "That's because I retired." The neighbors chuckled softly, but Derek kept going. "I mean, seriously, what did you even do in the Navy file paperwork?" More laughter. I shrugged. "Something like that." He pointed his beer bottle toward me dramatically. "See, that's exactly what I mean. Emily acts like you're some kind of secret badass." Emily immediately looked uncomfortable. Derek stopped, but he grinned wider. "What, I'm kidding." Then he leaned toward me. "You know what I think? I think old military stories are mostly exaggerated." The backyard went quiet. I simply flipped another burger. No anger, no reaction. That frustrated him more. Men like Derek feed on reactions. Without one, they feel invisible. A few minutes later, Emily came inside to help me carry plates to the kitchen. The moment we were alone, she whispered, "I'm sorry." I looked at her carefully. There was a faint bruise near her wrist, covered halfway by makeup. My stomach tightened. "What happened there?" She instantly pulled her sleeve down. "Nothing." "Emily." She avoided my eyes. "Dad, please," that word. Please. Not defensive. Not irritated. Afraid. And suddenly I knew. Maybe not every detail, but enough. That night after everyone left, I sat alone in my garage workshop. Duke slept beside my chair while rain tapped softly against the roof. I opened an old wooden storage chest I hadn't touched in years. Inside were pieces of another life. Photographs of men long dead. Challenge coins. Service medals. A folded flag. And one laminated card. Emergency communication codes. When Emily was 16, I taught her basic safety signals. Nothing extreme. Just precautions. If she ever felt unsafe and couldn't speak openly, she could send simple coded phrases. We treated it almost like a game back then. But I made her memorize one rule. If you ever send the real distress code, I come immediately, no questions asked. I remember Emily rolling her eyes at 16 years old. "Dad, you watch too many spy movies." Maybe I did. Or maybe fathers simply know the world better than daughters wish they did. Around midnight, my phone buzzed beside my chair. A text from Emily. "Dad, can you send me Mom's peach pie recipe?" Underneath it, "Trois en quatre benendis." My blood went cold instantly. 391 meant only one thing. Immediate danger. Call police. I stared at the screen for maybe 2 seconds. Then 26 years of training woke back up inside my bones. Calm, focused, cold. I stood slowly, walked to the gun safe and opened it. Not because I wanted revenge. Because my daughter was afraid. And fear changes a father into something dangerous. There's something strange about fear when you get older. Young men think fear feels loud. Heart pounding, hands shaking, breathing hard. But real fear, the kind that arrives when someone you love may be dying, comes quietly. Cold, focused, efficient. That's how I felt driving through the dark roads toward Emily's neighborhood that night. The windshield wipers pushed heavy rain aside while my headlights cut through sheets of water. My old Ford pickup rattled every time I hit a pothole, but I barely noticed. I had my phone on speaker with 911 dispatch. The young woman answering sounded nervous at first. "Sir, can you describe the situation?" "Yes," I said calmly. "Possible domestic assault in progress. Female victim inside residence. Male suspect intoxicated. Do you know if weapons are involved?" "Unknown." "Sir, are you currently approaching the house?" "Yes. Please wait for responding officers." I looked at the glowing red taillights ahead of me disappearing into the rain. "No," I answered quietly. "I won't be doing that." There was a pause. Then she asked carefully, "Sir, are you armed?" "Yes." Another pause. "What kind of firearm?" "Locked in the vehicle. I don't intend to use it unless absolutely necessary." That part was true. People misunderstand men like me. They imagine retired military veterans are eager for violence. Most of us spend the rest of our lives trying to avoid it. The dispatcher's voice softened slightly. "Sir, officers are 4 minutes out. I'll handle things until then." I hung up before she could argue. Emily's subdivision sat near the edge of town beside a half-finished development where construction had stalled after the pandemic. Dark houses, wet pavement, no movement. The rain had eased into a steady drizzle by the time I pulled up across the street from their home. All the downstairs lights were on. I could hear yelling before I even stepped out of the truck. Derek, drunk, raging. I crossed the yard quietly. Age changes how you move. At 68, my knees ache in cold weather and my shoulders pop when I reach too high in the garage. But training never fully leaves your body. Not the important parts. Awareness, balance, timing. As I approached the front window, I saw Emily inside. And every fear I'd carried for years suddenly became real. She was backed against the kitchen counter crying. One side of her lip was bleeding. Derek stood inches from her face screaming while shattered glass covered the floor around them. He grabbed her wrist hard enough to make her stumble. Something inside me became perfectly still, not angry. That surprises people when I tell this story. I wasn't angry yet. Anger is emotional. This was different. This was protective, like watching a wolf near a child. I moved toward the side gate leading to the backyard. The patio door wasn't fully closed. Rainwater blew softly through the opening curtains. Inside, Derek kept shouting, "You think your daddy's gonna save you?" Emily tried pulling away. "Please stop." Then he shoved her shoulder. Not hard enough to knock her down, hard enough to terrify her. That was enough for me. I entered silently. No dramatic entrance, no yelling, no threats. The old hardwood floor barely creaked under my boots. Derek didn't notice me until Emily looked past him suddenly. Her eyes widened. Dad. Derek turned around laughing. And for one unbelievable moment, he actually smiled at me. Look who's here, he slurred. Captain America. I kept walking calmly toward him. Step away from her. He scoffed. Or what? I repeated myself. Step away from my daughter. Emily's breathing sounded shallow and panicked. Derek spread his arms dramatically. Oh no, the old man's serious. Then he pointed at me. You know what your problem is, Walt. Everybody treats you like some wise old veteran, but you're just another retired nobody hiding in a garage. I didn't answer. People always expect violence to announce itself loudly. Real danger rarely does. Derek took 2 aggressive steps toward me. Bad decision. The moment his right shoulder dipped forward, instinct took over. One movement. That's all it was. Fast enough he never understood what happened. I redirected his arm, rotated behind him, and drove him face first into the kitchen floor before he could swing properly. His beer breath exploded into a curse. What the hell? I pinned his wrist behind his back carefully but firmly. Not enough to break it. Enough to control him completely. Derek thrashed beneath me in shock. How did you— Stop resisting, I said calmly. Emily stood frozen near the counter, crying into her hands. Derek tried bucking upward again. I adjusted pressure slightly. He gasped instantly. Pain compliance. Precise, controlled, temporary. Old skills. You're hurting me, he yelled. You're not hurt, I answered. You're restrained. That made him even angrier. He spat curses at me while struggling harder. Honestly, the whole thing lasted maybe 30 seconds before police lights flashed across the living room windows. 2 deputies rushed through the front door, weapons drawn. Sheriff's Department. I immediately released one hand and raised it slightly. Victim secure. Suspect restrained. Both deputies froze for half a second. One younger officer aimed at Derek while the older deputy stared at me closely. You could almost see the recognition happening in his brain. Not recognition of my face. Recognition of behavior. Calm breathing. Situational awareness. Controlled restraint. Military. The older deputy approached carefully. Sir, can you stand up slowly for me? I nodded once and rose carefully off Derek. The moment pressure lifted, Derek rolled over screaming dramatically. This psycho attacked me. The deputy ignored him completely. Instead, he looked toward Emily. Ma'am, are you injured? Emily's lip trembled. Yes. That single word changed the entire room. The younger deputy immediately handcuffed Derek while reading his rights over Derek's furious shouting. This is bullshit. You can't arrest me. He attacked me first. Nobody listened. Emily suddenly collapsed into tears against the kitchen counter. Real breakdown tears, years of fear pouring out all at once. I grabbed the blanket hanging over the nearby chair and wrapped it gently around her shoulders, the same way I used to after thunderstorms when she was little. It's okay, I whispered. You're safe now. She clung to me tightly, and that nearly broke me. Because fathers always think they'll recognize when their child is suffering. But sometimes suffering grows slowly, quietly, right inside your own family. The older deputy stepped beside me after EMTs arrived. Low voice, respectful tone. You military. I nodded. Retired Navy. His eyes lowered briefly toward the way I'd restrained Derek. Then back to me. Well, you handled yourself professionally. That almost made me laugh. Professionally. As if this were just another operation. But it wasn't. This was my daughter. And suddenly, after years of silence, I realized something painful. I should have come sooner. The strangest part about a house after violence is the silence. Not peaceful silence. Heavy silence. The kind that settles into walls and furniture like smoke after a fire. Emily stayed with me after Derek's arrest. At first, neither of us talked much. She slept in her old bedroom upstairs, the same room with faded horse posters she'd hung when she was 13. I hadn't changed much after she moved out. Same quilt Carol sewed years ago. Same little ceramic lamp shaped like a lighthouse. Maybe part of me always hoped she'd come home again someday. Just not like this. The first morning after the arrest, I woke before sunrise out of old habit and made coffee in the kitchen. Rain still tapped softly against the windows, while Duke lay near the back door snoring. Emily came downstairs wearing one of my old Navy sweatshirts. Her lip looked worse in daylight. Purple swelling, small cut near the corner. Seeing it made my chest tighten again. She avoided my eyes while pouring coffee. Sorry, she whispered. I frowned slightly. For what? For all this. That answer told me everything I needed to know about how long she'd been emotionally trapped. Victims apologize for surviving. I pulled out a chair slowly and sat down across from her. You don't owe me an apology, sweetheart. Tears immediately filled her eyes. She looked away fast. I should have left him earlier. I took a long breath before answering. Maybe. Her shoulders sank lower. But fear makes people stay in bad places longer than they should. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then finally she whispered something that shattered me. I didn't want you to think I failed. God, at 68 years old, after war and funerals and everything else, life throws at a man certain sentences still know how to cut straight through your ribs. I stared at my coffee quietly. Because the truth was, part of that was my fault. I wasn't an easy father after Carol died. That's the part older men sometimes avoid admitting. We grew up in generations where grief was treated like weakness. Men worked through pain, stayed quiet, kept moving. So that's what I did after cancer took my wife. I kept busy, fixed engines, cleaned gutters, mowed lawns twice a week, anything to avoid sitting still long enough to feel lonely. Emily was 24 then, young, heartbroken, still needing her father. But emotionally, I disappeared into myself. Not cruelly, just quietly. And children, even adult children, notice emotional distance more than we realize. One afternoon, a few days later, Emily finally started talking openly. Really talking. We sat on the back porch watching rain drift across the marsh behind my property, while Duke chased squirrels through wet grass. Emily wrapped both hands around a mug of tea. He wasn't always like this, she said softly. I stayed quiet. At first, Derek was charming, funny, protective. That's usually how it starts, I answered. She nodded slowly. After we got married, little things changed. Like what? She stared out toward the trees. He started criticizing my friends. Pause. Then my clothes. Another pause. Then how I talked. I listened carefully without interrupting. That's something age teaches you too. Sometimes people don't need solutions immediately. They need space to finally tell the truth. Emily continued quietly. If dinner wasn't ready on time, he'd get irritated. If I disagreed with him in public, he'd punish me afterward. What kind of punishment? She swallowed hard. Silent treatment at first, then her voice became smaller, then yelling. I already knew the next part before she said it. The first time he shoved me, he cried afterward, said he was stressed, said it would never happen again. I closed my eyes briefly. Classic cycle. Apology, excuse, temporary kindness, then escalation. Emily wiped tears from her cheeks. I kept thinking if I became calmer, or better, maybe things would go back to normal. That's not how men like Derek work. I know that now. She looked toward me carefully, but I didn't then. The pain in her voice wasn't only fear, it was embarrassment. That's another thing people misunderstand about abuse. Shame traps victims almost as much as fear does, especially women from good families, especially older generations taught to protect appearances. Emily whispered I was ashamed people would think I chose the wrong man. I leaned back slowly in my chair. Everybody chooses wrong people sometimes. She shook her head. Not Mom. That one hurt. Because Carol had been warm where I was cold, gentle where I was disciplined. Emily inherited her mother's softness. And maybe that softness made her vulnerable to men who mistook kindness for weakness. A few days later, Detective Sarah Bennett visited the house. Mid-40s, straightforward, no nonsense. She sat at my kitchen table flipping through paperwork while Emily nervously twisted tissues in her lap. We searched Derek's phone and laptop, Detective Bennett explained. There's evidence supporting ongoing domestic abuse. Emily looked down. Then quietly she said there's more. The detective raised an eyebrow. Emily reached into her purse and pulled out an old flash drive. I started recording arguments months ago. The room went silent. Detective Bennett carefully plugged the drive into her laptop. The first recording lasted only 40 seconds. But 40 seconds was enough. Derek screaming, objects breaking, Emily crying. Then one sentence from Derek made my blood freeze cold. If your father ever interferes, I'll make sure he regrets it. The detective removed the headphones slowly. Well, she said quietly, that's going to help your case. Emily looked ashamed again. I know recording him was wrong. Detective Bennett immediately shook her head. No, honey, surviving isn't wrong. That sentence visibly affected Emily. Sometimes victims need permission to stop blaming themselves. Was sure. That evening after the detective left, I went into the garage alone. I sat at my old workbench staring at nothing for a long time. Combat memories came back more often after the arrest. Funny how trauma works. You spend decades locking doors inside your mind, then one emotional shock swings them all open again. I remembered young Marines bleeding overseas. Remembered notifying parents their sons weren't coming home. Remembered all the times I stayed emotionally detached because soldiers survived by compartmentalizing pain. Maybe I'd done the same thing as a father. Compartmentalized too much. Later that night, Emily found me sitting there in darkness. She stepped beside my chair quietly. Can't sleep either, she asked. I shook my head. For a minute, we just listened to rain hitting the garage roof. Then she surprised me. Dad, were you scared overseas? Nobody had asked me that in years. I gave a small, tired smile. All the time. She looked genuinely shocked. But you were Navy SEALs. Fear doesn't disappear because of training, I answered. What matters is what you do while afraid. Emily stared downward thoughtfully. Then she whispered, I was afraid every day with Derek. I reached over slowly and squeezed her hand. You don't have to live afraid anymore. And for the first time since she was a little girl, my daughter leaned against my shoulder and cried herself to sleep. I never expected to wear my dress uniform again. Not at my age. Not after everything. The last time I'd worn it was at Carol's funeral 12 years earlier. Even then, I only wore the jacket because she loved seeing me in uniform. Said it reminded her that underneath all my quietness, there was still a man who once carried himself proudly. After she died, I packed the uniform away in the attic and figured it would stay there until I died too. But life has a strange way of reopening old closets, especially when family is involved. Derek's preliminary hearing happened in late October. Gray skies, cold rain, one of those damp Carolina mornings that settles into your joints. Emily sat beside me outside the courtroom clutching a paper cup of coffee with both hands. She looked healthier than she had in years, but still fragile in certain moments. Healing isn't dramatic. It's slow. Some mornings she smiled. Other mornings she barely left the guest room. Trauma comes in waves. I'd learned that overseas long ago. Inside the courtroom, Derek looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically, spiritually. Funny how confidence disappears once consequences finally arrive. His expensive suits were gone. His hair looked unwashed. Dark circles hung under his eyes from weeks in county lockup. But the bitterness remained. The moment he saw me beside Emily, his jaw tightened hard. His parents sat behind him looking exhausted and embarrassed. I actually felt sorry for them. No parent raises a child hoping he'll become cruel. At least I don't think they do. Derek's attorney stood and immediately began painting him as the victim. That's common in domestic violence cases, especially when the abuser comes from money. The lawyer described Derek as a stressed husband, a successful provider, a man struggling emotionally. Then he shifted toward me, and Mr. Walter Hayes, he continued dramatically used excessive force while acting outside the law. I stayed perfectly still. The prosecutor looked bored already, because evidence doesn't care about performance. The state presented Emily's injuries, police photographs, audio recordings, medical reports, witness statements from neighbors. Then came the body cam footage. The courtroom watched silently as the deputies entered the kitchen that night. There I was on screen, calm, controlled, restraining Derek without striking him. No screaming, no rage, just containment. One deputy's body cam captured Derek shouting drunken threats while Emily cried against the counter with blood on her lip. The defense attorney's argument weakened immediately after that. But Derek still wasn't finished humiliating himself. When he took the stand, he blamed everyone except himself. The alcohol, stress, marriage problems, Emily being too emotional. Then he looked directly toward me and sneered. He brainwashed her against me. That sentence finally caused something inside Emily to harden. I felt it beside me. She stood before the prosecutor even asked, voice shaking at first, then growing steadier. No, she said quietly. The courtroom turned toward her. My father didn't brainwash me. She took a long breath. He saved my life. Absolute silence followed. Emily described years of emotional abuse in painful detail. The insults, isolation, fear, walking on eggshells every single day. Several jurors looked visibly emotional. One older woman wiped tears from her eyes. Then Emily said something that nearly broke me again. I stopped recognizing myself during that marriage. God, that sentence hit harder than any combat memory ever had. Because war wounds soldiers. But abuse erases people slowly while they're still alive. Shush. During a recess, the prosecutor approached me near the hallway vending machines. You were special warfare, weren't you? I gave a small nod. How could you tell? She smiled faintly. My brother was Marine Recon. I almost laughed. Military people always recognize each other eventually. She hesitated before speaking again. Your restraint that night probably saved your daughter's case. What do you mean? If you'd lost your temper and beaten him badly, the defense would have shifted focus onto you. I nodded quietly. She was right. Revenge feels satisfying for a moment. Control protects people longer. That lesson took me decades to fully understand. The final sentencing hearing happened 6 weeks later. Emily almost didn't attend, but eventually she decided she needed closure. That morning, I climbed into the attic and opened the old garment bag holding my Navy dress uniform. The fabric smelled faintly like cedar and age. As I pinned the medals back onto the chest one by one, memories returned I hadn't visited in years. Friends laughing in helicopters, young men writing letters home, funerals with folded flags. I stared at my silver star for a long moment before attaching it carefully. Truthfully, I never liked medals much. Metal can't bring people back. Still, they matter to civilians. They remind people sacrifice existed before comfort became fashionable. When I walked into the courthouse wearing full dress whites, conversations immediately stopped. Even Emily stared at me quietly. "You never wear that," she whispered. "I know. You look different." Maybe I did. Or maybe she was finally seeing all the parts of me I spent years hiding. Inside the courtroom, Derek looked stunned the moment he saw me. For the first time since I'd known him, genuine fear crossed his face. Not because of violence, because suddenly he realized something humiliating. The quiet old man he mocked at barbecues had spent a lifetime carrying burdens Derek couldn't survive for a week. The judge reviewed the evidence carefully before sentencing. Then she asked whether I wished to make a statement. I stood slowly. Every joint in my body reminded me I was no longer young, but my voice remained steady. I spent most of my life around violence, I began. War, death, fear, loss. The courtroom stayed silent, and one thing I learned is this. I looked briefly toward Derek. Strength has nothing to do with making people afraid of you. A few people lowered their eyes. Real strength is protecting people who can't protect themselves in that moment. I paused carefully, especially family. Derek stared downward now. No arrogance left, just shame. Then I said something even I didn't expect. "I don't hate Derek." Emily looked at me in surprise. "I hate what he became. I hate what he did. But hatred spreads damage forever if you feed it long enough." The judge listened closely. "I'm asking this court for accountability," I continued. "Not destruction." That mattered. The sentence included prison time, mandatory alcohol treatment, domestic violence rehabilitation, permanent restraining orders. As deputies led Derek away, he suddenly stopped near the exit and looked back toward Emily. Tears filled his eyes. Not manipulative tears this time. Broken ones. "I'm sorry," he whispered. Emily didn't answer. She simply held my hand quietly while he disappeared through the courtroom doors. And for the first time in years, the fear inside her eyes was finally gone. Winter passed slowly after the trial. That's the thing about healing at our age. Nothing happens quickly anymore. Not recovery, not trust, not forgiveness. Everything arrives one careful step at a time. By February, the cold Carolina rain had finally given way to softer mornings. The trees behind my property began showing hints of green again, and Emily slowly started rebuilding pieces of her life. She found a small apartment downtown above a florist shop run by an elderly widow named Diane. The place wasn't fancy, but it was safe. Quiet. Sunlight filled the kitchen in the mornings. That mattered. Safety becomes beautiful after chaos. Emily also started working again part-time at the public library. At first, she worried people would whisper about the trial, but small southern towns surprise you sometimes. Most folks treated her gently. Older women especially. Women who'd lived long enough to recognize pain when they saw it. One afternoon, Emily admitted something while we were having coffee together. "I thought everybody would judge me for staying." I stirred cream into my mug slowly. "Most people over 60 have survived something painful," I said. "That changes how they see others." She looked down thoughtfully. "I still feel embarrassed sometimes." I nodded. "That feeling may stay a while." She looked worried at that answer. So I added quietly, "But shame fades faster when it's exposed to love instead of secrecy." Carol used to say things like that. Funny how marriage leaves pieces of people living inside you long after they're gone. Brr. As for me, life changed too. For years after retiring, I'd isolated myself more than I realized. Routine became my hiding place. Hardware store, fishing pier, television, sleep. Repeat. But after everything with Emily, silence no longer felt peaceful. It felt lonely. So I started reconnecting with people again. Old veterans mostly. A retired Marine named Curtis convinced me to attend Wednesday breakfast at the VFW hall. At first I resisted. Too many memories. Too many stories. But eventually I went. Turns out old soldiers laugh more than civilians expect. We talked about grandchildren. Bad knees, blood pressure, medication, and boats that refuse to start. Very little about combat. That surprised younger people sometimes. Truth is, veterans don't spend their old age reliving glory. Mostly we spend it appreciating ordinary peace. One morning after breakfast, Curtis looked at me and said, "You seem lighter lately." I thought about that a while driving home. Maybe he was right. Not happy exactly, but lighter. Like some old weight had finally shifted. Sure. Around springtime, Emily brought my grandson Noah over for Sunday dinner. Noah was 10 years old, skinny, curious, missing one front tooth. Before the divorce proceedings, Derek rarely allowed him to visit me alone. Said I was too old-fashioned. Now Noah ran through my backyard like he owned the place. Children recover from tension faster than adults if you give them safety early enough. That afternoon, we sat beside the lake near my property, fishing for bluegill while dragonflies skimmed the water. Noah studied me carefully before asking, "Mom says you were in the Navy." I was. "Like regular Navy?" I smiled slightly. "Something like that." He grinned. "Mom says you tackled Dad like Batman?" I nearly choked laughing. "Well, your mother exaggerates." "No, she doesn't." "Yes, she does." "Nope." I shook my head, smiling. Then Noah became quiet for a minute. Finally, he asked softly, "Why was Dad so mean?" There it was. The question every child eventually asks. I looked out over the lake before answering carefully. Sometimes people carry anger they never learned how to control. "Did he hate Mom?" "No," I said honestly. "That's what makes it sad." Noah frowned. "Then why hurt her?" I thought about all the years I spent studying violence in different forms. War, fear, control, abuse. Then I answered the simplest way I could. Because some people confuse love with ownership. Noah considered that seriously. Then he nodded slowly like children do when they understand more than adults realize. A few minutes later, I handed him the fishing rod. "You know what real strength is?" "What?" "Making people feel safe around you." He smiled proudly after catching a tiny bluegill 15 minutes later. At 10 years old, he already handled disappointment better than many grown men. Sheer. One evening in early summer, Emily arrived at my house carrying an envelope. "No return address," she said quietly. I recognized the prison stamp immediately. Derek. She sat beside me at the kitchen table while I opened it carefully. The letter was handwritten. Messy. No excuses, no self-pity. Just honesty. Derek admitted things I never expected him to admit. His drinking, his insecurity, his need for control, his shame. One sentence stood out most. "I spent years trying to feel powerful by making other people smaller." That line told me rehabilitation might actually be working. Or at least beginning. Emily looked nervous while I finished reading. "What do you think?" she asked softly. I folded the letter carefully. "I think remorse is painful when it's real." "Do you forgive him?" That question sat heavily between us. At my age, I've learned forgiveness isn't a light switch. It's a decision you practice repeatedly, sometimes daily. "I don't know yet," I admitted. Emily nodded slowly. "That's fair." Then after a long silence, she whispered something that nearly brought tears to my eyes. "But thank you for saving me." I looked at my daughter carefully. Healthier now, stronger, still healing. And I realized something important. I hadn't saved her alone. She saved herself the moment she asked for help. Many people never do. That takes courage too. A few Sundays later, our family gathered again for dinner at my house. Nothing fancy. Fried chicken, mashed potatoes, cornbread. The kind of meal Carol used to make when money was tight, but love wasn't. Sunlight poured through the kitchen windows while Noah laughed at something on television. Emily looked peaceful for the first time in years. Real peace. Not forced smiling. Not survival mode. Peace. And sitting there at that old wooden table, listening to dishes clatter and family voices fill the house again, I finally understood something that took me nearly 7 decades to learn. When I was young, I thought strength meant winning fights. Then war taught me strength meant surviving pain. But getting older taught me the truth. Strength is answering the phone when somebody is afraid. Strength is staying calm when anger would feel easier. Strength is protecting people without losing your humanity in the process. And sometimes, strength is allowing yourself to heal too. If this story meant something to you tonight, if you've ever loved someone through pain, protected your family, or learned hard lessons later in life, I hope you'll share it with someone who may need to hear it. And remember, no matter your age, it is never too late to choose kindness over control, peace over pride, and love over fear.